One of the things that Paul Benassi shared with us when he came forward was that at the parties that they had in Omaha, Nebraska, the Omaha police chief was involved. And if you'll remember, as I was talking earlier, when I received the death threat and I asked the police chief to call over to Omaha,
right.
When the other 2 girls were missing, he wouldn't.
Yeah.
The police chief told people Johnny was a runaway, don't look for him.
Right.
The police chief tried to list him as a runaway. The police chief told the FBI that they were not welcome in the case, did not want their help. The common denominator was always the police chief. And as years went forward, we gained information that our police chief in West Des Moines was one of the men that was going over to the parties they were having in Omaha.
Yeah.
And there's an investigator who's a former New York police chief or police detective. Mm-hmm. He worked on the Son of Sam's case. His name is Jim Rothstein, and he is now investigating trafficking of children. He called the West Des Moines Police Department. He talked to the captain, and he asked him, what means of investigation did you use on the Gosch case? His answer was this: well, we didn't do much. We created a phony composite drawing to show the public, but we were ordered to stand down the first morning of the kidnapping. Now, who would order a police chief to stand down? Somebody with some power.
You bet.
And you hear a statement like that, it just absolutely turns your heart over.
Of course. Because
your little child is out there in the hands of some animal, and you find out that the police chief never even looked. And in the middle of the night, about 2:30, on March 18th of 1997, there was a knock at my door. And I was scared to death. I went to the door, and I looked out in the hall, and there was the person out there. And I could tell by the eyes and some of the facial features that it was Johnny. And he came in. He was here approximately 2.5 hours. And what he told me during that time was how the network operated, what these kids were being taken for, that they used a form of brainwashing or mind control on them in order to control them, and that the kids were farmed out for prostitution to rich pedophiles. And he came because I told him on national TV that I would help him. And he didn't want money. He didn't want to stay. I thought he was home to stay when he showed up at the door, but he wasn't. He told me that he came to give me some information and some names so that I could get these guys arrested. And he said, no, I can't stay. My life would be in danger, and so would yours be. Then I was criticized later by people and said I should have wrestled him to the floor and made him stay.
No,
And that wasn't what was the right decision at that time.
Correct.
I'm very proud of him for having survived it.
A lot of kids didn't.
I know. A lot of them die. And the fact that he survived it at all and grew into adulthood is amazing. And I realized right from the beginning that everything I did publicly, everything I did on the case privately, I was holding my son's life in my hands. And I know that one of the things they do is to force the kids to commit a felony. And they use a lot of drugs on them. They force the children to commit a felony, and then they use that as leverage.
Okay, we're up on a break here. Right after the break, we're going to move forward to the Jeff Gannon thing now.
Okay.
Sherman Skolnick, one of my columnists, was first to make the connection in public, I think on February 19th. Hunter Thompson committed suicide, or so they say, on February the 20th. Literally hours after Sherman broke the connection. And he said in no uncertain words that Gannon is Gosch.
I received a phone call from a young man that lived in Seattle, and he asked me if I knew about what was going on the internet, and was Jeff Gannon my son? And I didn't know what he was talking about. And he said, well, I'll send you a couple of links. And I was just astounded to see all of this that was going on. When I first looked at the photograph, I couldn't quite see what everybody else was seeing. It was a very fuzzy photograph, and it was kind of a side view of his face.
Right.
Well, then a little bit later, I got some better photographs, and I took them and I put them next to Johnny's and began to just compare feature to feature, like just around the mouth and chin, for instance. There are many features of Jeff Gannon that are identical to Johnny's. And there were moments when I would look at it and I'd think, yeah, I can see that. It might be him. Then other times I would think, how would you go from a 12-year-old kidnapped boy to sitting in the White House press room with such a leap? And yet I knew that a lot of these kids that weren't killed within the first few years of being in these rings were actually groomed for high positions. They weren't running around the country like ragamuffins. They were actually used in strategic positions.
Sure.
For a purpose. And they achieved that through some of the mind control.
I'm sure many are asking, well, you saw him 7 years earlier, and how did he look then?
Then he had his hair shoulder length, dyed black, and had a very dark tan because he had been outdoors a lot. Johnny used to get very, very dark when he'd be in the sun, and I do too. And he looked completely different in that respect because it's hard to get past that look, which was the last I had seen him, to the shaved head look.
Right.
And yet, one of the other kids that was involved in this ring that Johnny was in, he had contacted me about 2 years before and told me that Johnny had shaved his head. But then to see it with Gannon and the notoriety of how big this had become. Well, from that point on, then I contacted a private investigator and we began working on the background on Gannon. He showed up only 2 years ago. Got his journalism credentials off the internet for $50.
Yeah, two-day course or whatever it was.
And so there were so many things like, who was he before he was Gannon? Was he really Guckert? Or was that an assumed identity? Was he trying to give us clues by choosing the name Gannon? Because Gannon was the last name of the editor of the Toyne Register when Johnny was kidnapped.
Pretty amazing coincidence.
And then on Gannon's website, he had a paragraph about the art of hiding in plain sight.
Well, there you go.
And then the initials that he chose were the very same as his own. I mean, JDG.
You really can't be much more subtly blatant than that, can you?
Exactly. There were so many subtle hints there, but yet we were lacking that one final piece of evidence. And the one thing that would clear this up for everybody would be a DNA test.
Real simple.
It would be very simple.
One swab.
And Mr. Gannon has been approached on my behalf by someone, and the moment he heard what it was about at his front door, he slammed the door in the face of the person that was trying to talk to him.
Kind of speaks loudly, doesn't it, in and of itself?
And I have tried to contact him on several occasions personally with no result. So,
he may have a lot to lose.
I think so.
If an absolute ID were made and he doesn't want any part of it, and I think what you're saying is you can understand that.
I can understand that, and I do not want to do anything to jeopardize him or his safety at all.
Right.
At some point, if it is my son, I would like to know, and if it is not my son, I would like to know.
Right, well said.